Good evening from Central Pennsylvania, and welcome to another Provident webinar. I'm your host, Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education for Provident. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing two chiefs I've had the pleasure of interacting with over the last few years. I first met Chief Yancey through my association with the International Association of Fire Chiefs Volunteer Combination Officer section, and we discovered that Eric Minkler and the chief had known one another for years. Eric was a young firefighter in the Air Force when I served as the Assistant Chief of Training at RAF Falconbury in England. I met Chief Cramer when I was enrolled as a student at the International Association of Fire Chiefs Recruiting and Retention Program Coordinator certification training in Peters Township, where he was serving as a young career company officer. I've had the pleasure to watch the both of them in action as members of the VCOS board, and I have to tell you, I'm pretty impressed with their work. They haven't let any grass grow under their feet. I'll give them the opportunity to tell you more about themselves after I review our monthly Provident introductory slides. And I got to make sure I'm sharing here.
Yeah,
you able to see that slides?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So who is Provident? We got started in 1902 as an independent insurance agency in the Pittsburgh area. And in 1928, the owners of the business discovered that volunteer firefighters didn't have any kind of protection if they got hurt while they were doing work for the fire department and couldn't work at their regular jobs. So they started a customized accident and health policy, which we continue with today. Today, we provide services to volunteer combination career firefighters, emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. And recently, we started offering the same services to law enforcement across the United States. We're celebrating our 7th year as a top insurance employer, as published by the Insurance Business America. The programs that we offer are accident and health program. In a lot of states, it may be referred to as your fireman's relief. We do have a first responder assistance program if you're an accident and health client. For the lack of a better term or definition, it's kind of a stripped down version of an employee's assistance program. The member and their immediate family are able to access that system by calling a toll-free number. We have a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy that would provide protections to your members both on and off duty, a group term life policy, a critical illness and cancer policy that would provide benefits for an individual that is diagnosed with cancer, has a heart attack, stroke, or renal failure, and then our Fire Plus property and casualty insurance. And if you're a property and casualty client of ours, you're entitled to use our Fire Plus Academy, which is actually hosted by Fire Rescue One with over 800 courses. And all of the full-length EMS courses there are approved for continuing education through CAPC. On March the 25th, we'll be doing a webinar with Jeff Pauley, who's really involved with arson investigators and fire investigators across the United States. And the title is "The Fire's Out, What's the Issue?" I just recorded a podcast with Jeff yesterday. Tonight, as originally introduced, I've got Chief Al Yancey from the Minooka Fire Protection District in Illinois and Chief Jordan Cramer, Fire Chief of South Strabane Township, and the acting township manager. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing those slides. There we go. All right. So Chief Yancey, let's start with you. How about introducing yourself to our audience tonight?
All right. Well, thanks, Ed. It's always great to join you and visit for a little while. Appreciate you inviting me to the podcast. My name's Al Yancey. I'm the fire chief in Minooka, Illinois, the Minooka Fire Protection District. I've been chief here for 21 years. So seen a lot of change in this organization. We've moved into a very much combination department over the years. And I have right at 36 years of service. Started as a cadet recruit in a volunteer department in Southern Illinois, and just have risen through the ranks to now be chief here in Minooka, and also serve on the BCOS board for the International Fire Chief. So again, thank you for having me here. Appreciate it.
I'm glad you're with us. Chief Cramer, tell our listeners about yourself.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for the invite. As Ed mentioned, my name is Jordan Cramer. I'm the Chief of Fire and Emergency Services in South Strabane Township in southwestern PA. And as he also mentioned, I've been serving for about 1.5 years as the acting assistant township manager here. We're a medium-sized municipality, contain 2 major interchanges for I-79, I-70, the retail capital of our county, about 1,400 calls annually with a combination system. So we have a very diverse call type and area that we serve, so it always keeps things interesting. Also work as a contractor for the IFC on several projects, instructing some courses, ranging from recruitment and retention to inclusion, and kind of how to successfully deliver accommodation fire service delivery. And I also sit on the board of the BCOS of the IFC with Chief Yancey. So
Okay.
Thanks again for having us.
So before we go much further, I did put a question in parentheses when I sent the script out. So I'm going to ask this question to you first, Chief Cramer. How did you end up becoming the chief of the department? I mean, I know there's a backstory there. If you want to tell the whole backstory, that's entirely up to you.
Yeah. So my background is a little bit different, kind of a hybrid between public safety and the private sector. A lot of my life, I ran a successful small business and slowly kind of changed over into full-time public safety when I realized that I was more motivated by helping others than I was by money. So when this job opened up, I worked at a department a few municipalities over, and figured I'd throw my hat in the ring and see what would happen. At the time that I started, our department was kind of at a crucial turning point. We had a fatal fire in a senior high rise that occurred when our department was not staffed. We only had career staffing for a portion of the day. There was division that was occurring between our municipality, between our career fire union, the volunteer department. And there was just a lot going on, and we needed to kind of reevaluate who we were and where we were at, and how we were going to continue in a path forward together. So things were a little bit tense when I started, but it had a lot of people in the right state of mind where they were willing to do anything kind of to get on the right page and for us to be able to work forward together. So I'm sure we might stumble on some other facets of this whole journey throughout the lesson tonight. So,
all right. Thanks, Chief. Chief Yancey, I didn't realize you've been at Minooka 21 years. When did you start there? When you were like 14? You're not that old, are you?
Oh, I'm not that old. Let's keep with that theme. Well, I came here in 2003. I was hired here originally, and I applied for this job a couple of years earlier, and went through an assessment process, went through a selection, interviews, all that, and I wasn't selected as the fire chief at that time, and then did take a job at another department in Kentucky. And then it wasn't too long after that, about 1.5 years or so later, Minooka called me and said, "We remember you from the assessment center," and wanted me to come up and do an interview again with them. And they chose to hire me at that time. So I took the job in 2003. And this community was and is growing very rapidly. And that was part of it. At the time that I started, it was me and the administrative assistant as the full-time people. We utilized a contract service for paramedics and had part-time firefighters and volunteers. That was makeup of the organization. And community has continued to grow. I know, Ed, you came through here, and this is my chance to get back at you. You came through here and didn't stop and visit me. I'm never going to let you forget that. As you drove through I-80 to come by and saw how big our community is growing, and a lot of warehouse and logistical facilities going on at an intersection of I-55 and I-80 southwest of Chicago. So it's a busy, growing area. And so, yeah, I've been here since then, and we've seen a lot of change, a lot of growth, change in our organization, change in our community.
So there was you and an admin person when you started. What do you have today? How many people today, Chief?
We're up to 52 total. That includes career, part-time, our recruits and our cadets and our civilian staff. Today we have a full-time fire inspector, full-time public educator, and we just in January put in battalion chiefs for our organization. So it's next growth. We try to keep 10 people, around 10 or 11 on duty, and that includes a full-time, part-time as well.
Okay. Chief Cramer, you mentioned that your department had some career people. They weren't staffed around the clock. Where are you at today? Just to give our listeners an idea of what the both of you are managing.
Sure. So we're at about 17 total career staff now, between full-time, part-time, plus as of a day ago, a full-time administrative assistant for me, which I'm very excited about. And we've got about 35 other volunteers between active volunteer firefighters, support personnel, fundraisers, et cetera. So we're somewhere around 50 to 55 personnel also.
Okay. All right. So, Chiefs, while I was doing my research for this, I did a Google search. Mistakes new fire chiefs make during the first 100 days. And it revealed a plethora of articles to links to books, advice, etc. I mean, I could have spent days just reading the first 2 pages of the returns on Google. So, Chief Yancey, with that in mind, what did you do to prepare yourself for your first 100 days or your very first day as a fire chief?
Well, it was a long time ago, obviously, that I did that. But looking back on it, and just some of the advice and working with the BCOS and doing some work with new and interim fire chief project, looking back to when I was becoming a new fire chief, it's so critically important to do the research about the area, the town, the surrounding area. For me, I was looking at this coming to an area that was close to Chicago, a bigger city, bigger area, coming from a more rural setting. So doing the research, driving around, looking to see what the community is like. And at the time, for me, our community really wasn't that big. The warehouses that you saw, they were not here. That was still coming. I think at the time there maybe was actually one traffic light. Now we have a dozen or more, so driving through the community, researching about what's available here, housing prices, of course, that's the kind of thing that you're looking at in terms of looking at the community for potentially taking that position. And then, getting your family settled is important, because that's going to take the stress away from you. And then just getting into the organization. And one of the things that I did when I came here is set up interview time with everybody. It was a smaller department at the time, and that could be a little logistically challenging depending on how big the organization you're going to. But I sat down and had questions that I wanted to ask them about what's working, what's not working, and really tried to sit down with everyone, the volunteers, the contracted paramedics we have, the staff, and then just get out and learn to who the people are in your community, the public works director, for us, we're a fire district, so I had to meet the mayor. I had to go meet the village administrator because we're a separate entity. So getting to know all those people is important when you're going to walk in the door, and doing your research, because I can guarantee you that the people that you're coming to be their fire chief, they have done their research on you. So doing your research on the community.
Okay. Chief Cramer, same question to you.
Sure. One of the things that ended up being really, really helpful to me was the fact that about a year prior to accepting the position, the department had undergone a study by an independent consultant. And I actually did not end up implementing most of what the study came back with. However, what was really, really helpful were the results of the surveys that they had sent the staff, the volunteers, essentially everyone that was involved in our department, as well as the elected officials. So the firm that did that was able to provide me with the raw data, all of the responses that people put, every single member of the organization, about what they felt. And that allowed me to start to develop the roadmap of what needed fixed. It was a great tool. And it also kind of, it helps to be able to hopefully assess that here in another year or so and see where we've come from where we started. The other thing that was my playbook, and it's kind of unique since we're both on the call tonight, but the IFC's article, which I think you're going to talk about, but you're the fire chief, now what? That guideline about your first 100 days as a fire chief was one of the most instrumental pieces that I had to kind of figure out what I was going to do first. So Chief Yancey worked as, I think, the chair on the committee to create that document. And I ended up following through with most of the steps and completing a 100-day report during that time. And I think it set the right foundation to be able to move forward to where we are today.
Okay. So I have to share this with you. Last night, I was sitting upstairs thinking, I'm going to do a webinar tonight on the first 100 days as someone being a fire chief. I realized at 65 going on 66, I don't have any more 100 days as a fire chief to be concerned about. So I don't, but when I look back over my career, having been in the military and gone from military installation to military installation, even if you weren't going there as a fire chief, if you were going there as a firefighter or supervisor, you basically had 100 days, to 90 to 100 days to establish yourself. So the people that had been there for a while could accept you. It's kind of like you're establishing your credibility during that first 90 to 100 days when I went from one base to another base, and you're there 3 years and then leave and go to another one. So you did mention this, Chief. One of the links I found during the Google search was, you're the fire chief, now what? Guidance for new and interim fire chiefs. It was a document that was prepared and released in 2019 through the International Association of Fire Chiefs Volunteer Combination Officer section and the Executive Fire Officer section. There were also links to several other resources. We will provide a link in the email that we'll send to all the participants at the end of this in the next day or two. But Chief Cramer, if memory serves me correctly, the VCOS had a roundtable discussion about this topic at the symposium in the Sun in 2024. Can you summarize what you learned from the participants at that roundtable?
Yeah, there were 2 chief roundtables that we did that ended up being very successful, it seems. One was on mergers and consolidations, and the other one was essentially an open chiefs forum that touched on this topic many times. The big takeaways for me, as usual, were the similarity of the department issues. So, when you go to these conferences, you find that whether you're looking at a department in DC, a combination system with thousands of members, career and volunteer, or myself and Chief Yancey's department, most of the issues that we're dealing with the compared to the leadership of these larger departments are the same, just on different scales. So it's nice sometimes to kind of hear it from, chiefs from larger areas. And the other part, the takeaway from those two roundtables for me was that we have to start thinking differently in order to adjust to today's problems. Everything from what we're seeing now with funding and what may or may not be changing with that to recruitment and retention. Everything that we have been doing maybe has worked or hasn't worked for a period of time, but all of those items are not going to be our solution looking at the next decade or so. So we have to start thinking outside of the box.
Chief Yancey, any additional comments from the roundtables?
Yeah, no, I would just echo that it's everyone is dealing with the same category of problems, maybe different parts of the country, and maybe slightly different challenges with community or size, but that's exactly where we're at. We have to think differently about how we're running combination departments, for sure, about the leadership techniques, and how, with volunteerism declining, just lots of different issues that we have to deal with, and everyone is dealing with it.
So I'm going to throw two things out here while we're on it so I don't forget. For those, our listeners, if you've never been to the Symposium in the Sun, it's in Clearwater, Florida in November. And what I'm saying to you is get out of your own backyard and go listen to other people. It's amazing what you can pick up on. And Clearwater is a pretty nice place to be in November when it's 70, 75 degrees and the sun's out. Even when it's cloudy, it's still nice and warm. And we'll be sure to include a link for the Symposium in the Sun when we send the material out to our listeners tonight. But it's a perfect opportunity for you to get out and network with some chiefs elsewhere. And the other comment I'll make is, and both the chiefs talked on, recruiting and retention. One of the things I noticed 10 years ago when I was leaving the fire commissioner's office is combination departments are popping up more and more frequently. I know here in Pennsylvania, especially in southeastern Pennsylvania and southwestern PA now, because it's the only way to solve the problem in a lot of communities. So, again, I'm going to plug the Symposium in the Sun. You want an opportunity to sit in on some of the round tables that the chiefs talked about and spend the time talking to other fire chiefs from other parts of the country. You can't find a nicer place to do it. And it's a really great time for everybody. So Chief Yancey, now, again, I didn't realize you'd been there 21 years, so you might have to really dig deep to answer this one. Are there any lessons that you would like to share with our listeners from your first 100 days when you were a chief? Things that went well for you, things that maybe didn't go so well.
Yeah, well, as was mentioned, I worked on the You're the Fire Chief project, so bringing that to the table and working on that, and as a committee and talking to other folks, frankly, I wish I knew then what I knew now from going through that and realizing, you mature into those positions and you look back and say, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have done that. And really the work that we did here in this publication is taking from people around the country who served on this committee and having that discussion about what would you have done differently? Well, these are the things that I would have done differently. That publication, as Jordan mentioned, helped him tremendously. And I've heard people across the country say, I looked at that book to how to get through the first 100 days. And looking back to my days of starting here and starting at another department prior to this, looking back and and those are lessons learned for me. I mean, I guess in the document that would put on paper to say, I learned that I need to go make contact with people. I also learned that you hit the ground running when you move into those positions, whether you moved across the country or to the other side of the county, is that you have to hit the ground running as the fire chief. They expect you to lead, and we talk about the continuity of operations, and you have to very quickly surround yourself with the people that will support you, knowing that you're new, and be able to work with you to move forward. And then just working through all the contacts and the network. And that's going to be so vitally important because I can remember only being here a little while and was called to be a mutual aid chief in a neighboring community. I hadn't even met that guy yet. I hadn't been here long enough to figure out where my office was most days, much less figure out the neighboring departments. And so it is so critically important to get out and meet people and those stakeholders, both in the emergency services and the community leadership as well.
Okay, Chief Cramer, same question to you.
Where to begin? I used to always tell people that I'd never wanted to be a 5 bugle fire chief because I don't necessarily like politics, and I don't think that they have a place in public safety. And that I'd love to be a deputy chief or an assistant chief and just run fire operations. But the joke's on me because, that's where I found myself. So one of the things is just get used to politics. Much of my jobs, many of my days are spent dealing with local and state politicians. And one of the things I've found is maybe I didn't give my former chief as much credit for how much that kind of takes out of you. We're living in a different world where when it comes to local politics, and it takes a lot to advocate for funding for local fire and emergency services. And we think that should be an easy decision. I used to always think, how does politics come into play in public safety? It's pretty standard. There aren't any questions about it, but there are. You're dealing with fake news and false narratives and folks that just don't want to see change, and that's difficult. So that's one part of it, which kind of leads into the next one that I was thinking about when you asked this question, which is just kind of resiliency and what that is. So I faced a lot of struggles. Again, we had a lot of success moving our department to the spot that it needed to be. But what we have continually dealt with is just some pushback from a very small group of folks that don't want to see the change externally, not from within the department. And that takes a toll eventually. There are personal attacks and things like that. So, but I think that resiliency comes from the ability to have a network. My involvement in the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and specifically the Volunteer and Combination Officer section, number one, I wouldn't be sitting where I am without having gotten involved in that. And I owe all that to a previous assistant chief of mine that was willing to start to send me to the conferences that you've both talked about when I was a teenager. But the mentorships and the relationships and network that I've gained from that are kind of what keeps you moving through the process. So when I hit a roadblock or I'm dealing with something that just, you never thought that you might be dealing with, and you're able to call a chief from a couple states over, and they've dealt with that at some point, and they talk you through it, or if nothing else, they're able to listen and sympathize with you. And I think that's what keeps us resilient, and with the ability to come back the next day and keep kind of doing this hamster wheel over and over again.
Well, I can certainly understand your comment about the politics, having worked at the state level for 14 and a half years and dealing with 253 members of the General Assembly and their staffs. And it amazed me how many of them never rode a fire truck, never spent time in a firehouse, but they knew the job better than you did. And they knew what was right, and you didn't know what you were talking about. A lot of my friends and a lot of people I worked with wondered how I put up with that for 14 and a half years. And I will tell you, it took its effect on me at times. Okay. You had to find a way to get away from it and recuperate. Okay, whatever that might be. For me, going to my mountain ground and running the leaf blower for 4 hours was really therapeutic. Okay, so spending time on the end of the weed eater. You got to find a way to step away from it, and then, like you said, both of you said, being able to talk to some other folks and get their take on what you're experiencing can be very helpful.
I would just add on to what Jordan said about coming into an organization, the formal and the informal leaders that you have to be aware of, because whether or not you're an internal candidate that took the role of the chief, or you're an external candidate that came in to take that role, there's always that possibility that someone else in the organization wanted that job. And I think it's vitally important to understand, not only the formal leaders, but those informal leaders, because that's someone you'll have to continue to work with, and you talk about the politics of it. But sometimes coming in from outside the community into the community, you don't know anybody, and those people know everybody, and they have lived in those communities. And so it is a delicate balance. And one of the things that we all talk about is the importance of having that confidant person that you can bounce those things off of. That is so critically important, what Jordan said about having someone that, and Ed mentioned the symposium in the sun. You're going to find those people at symposium and those type of networking events that you will establish a network with, that later on, they're a department of a similar size or similar, and you can call them halfway across the country, and they don't really know who the players are in the situation. They don't know the players at all of who you're dealing with, but you can bounce those ideas off of them. And that has to be someone who will be willing to tell you that that's a dumb idea that you're thinking of, or to tell you that it's a great idea. But they have to be willing to tell you that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard, And so you have to have that network and be ready to have that conversation and think about how you bring that organization together, even in the midst of maybe somebody else wanted that position.
Yeah, and you touched on something. I was always fond of saying, don't surround yourself with yes men. It's good to have people around you that are willing to challenge you behind closed doors, and tell you, like Chief Yancey said, hey, that's a dumb idea. And it may very well be a dumb idea, but those folks need to understand, okay, I hear what you're saying, and we're going to move forward. And, whatever you do, I don't need you out on the floor backdooring me. Don't be stabbing me in the back. And that can be a fine line to try to walk with folks. And to your point, Chief, about the informal leaders, when you know who the informal leaders are, if you can get them on your side, you got a major victory. And sometimes that takes a lot of work, so very valid points from the both of you. So one of my favorite fire chiefs was Chief Brunacini. I had the pleasure of working with him and others very, very early on the near miss reporting program. And I could sit and listen to the chief all day. I attended his blue card seminar shortly after I left the office of the state fire commissioner. And I want to share a personal story with you. I had been the fire commissioner in the state for 14 and a half years. We got a new governor. The new governor asked me to find something else to do. That's how I landed at Provident 10 years ago. But during one of the breaks, Chief Brunacini called me aside and he said, I want to talk with you for just a second. And the guy took my arm and my hand, and he rubbed my hand, and he said, I want to know how you're doing. One of the few people that I worked with at the national level that actually took the time to ask me how I was doing over the fact that I lost a job that I love doing. And I'll never forget that about Chief Brunacini. So Chief Brunacini was big on customer service, both the internal and external customers. What advice can you offer to a new fire chief in dealing with this during the first 100 days?
Absolutely. Customer service is kind of central to what I believe and feel within the fire service, to the point where my folks probably get tired of hearing about it from me. But we spent a lot of time talking about what customer service means. That first 100 days, you have a lot of people coming at you that want to know what your expectations are. I heard a lot of, well, but what is the SOG going to be for this? What's the SOP going to be for this? A month after I started. And that first 100 days for me was a period of assessment. But I clearly had come to the point where I needed to establish some priorities so that they felt that they were doing what I expected. And that came down to just simply respond to people's needs quickly, do it safely, and treat people right. And if you were doing those three things, ultimately, I'm going to be happy while we start to work on assessing the organization. But while I'm doing that, I need our company officers and the firefighters to focus on those three items. And to me, that kind of boils down to what Chief Brunacini preached. And his educational series that are, I think, available on YouTube from maybe Fire Engineering, they're fantastic for even today's fire officers. Our officers watch those videos still and talk about it, to just talk about how that emphasis can go back to customer service. And we do need the reminder sometimes. We know we're in the public safety and public service field, but there are times where we get too distracted by ourselves and our apparatus, or what crew didn't wash the dishes or whatnot, and we forget that the sole purpose of our being and why we're here is to serve the public and to do it well. So yeah.
Chief Yancey?
Yeah, I would reference back to the guide, that one of the things we talked about is looking at the concept of the SWOT analysis, and getting your staff and command together, have those meetings very quickly with everyone and start looking at what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats to our organization. I think you have to recognize that occasionally there are people, Jordan kind of mentioned, that there are people who have an agenda. They want to accomplish their task, and you're new. So listen to me, I have a task I want to complete. And you need to look at it from a global standpoint in terms of the organization of your internal stakeholders. Where is our organization, and what are our strengths and weaknesses right now? And as far as the external, getting all of those people together, I would encourage you, if you're the new chief, invite the school superintendent, the public works director, the police chief, of course, or community leaders, invite them to coffee at the firehouse and get to know them. You're busy, they're busy. Trying to get schedules together these days are nearly impossible for multiple amounts of people, but put that invitation out to there and find out, again, if you're coming in from the outside of the organization, find out what it is that the fire department has been doing well for you, and what is it that we've not been doing so well for you, because that's all about serving the community.
Okay. So I have a comment here in the Q&A from Justin Fox. I'm going to read the whole thing. I've been an officer at a volunteer fire district, came up through the ranks, not knowing nothing to now. I'm the assistant chief, training officer, and recruit and retention coordinator. I'm also the very first employee of this district. I basically work nonstop. I feel as though I let our district down if we miss a call. We're also a non-staff station. We have 25 volunteers on the roster, including 6 cadets. Yet we have 2 to 4, depending on the time of the day, that actually respond to calls. Drill nights have a highly fluctuation attendance. How do you feel like you're not swimming up a waterfall in the wintertime, just trying to hold a standard so no one gets hurt and things actually get done on scene, but not wanting to drive volunteers away? Boy, there's a lot packed into that statement and question. Justin, and you'll have to answer in the Q&A, but I have a question for you. Have you gone to or had the opportunity to attend the International Association of Fire Chiefs Recruiting and Retention Coordinator Program? If you would type an answer in there to us. He says yes. Okay. So you got one step headed in the right direction. There's just so much there. Chiefs, I'll throw this out to you. Can you offer them any advice?
Well, you're going to feel that feeling a lot, I think, Justin. I have that feeling probably the majority of the time, most days. And to me, that just means that we're making progress. If we're not feeling that way, then things might be status quo, which isn't always the best thing. But I kind of fall back to trying to look for that mentor or network. So whether you have a neighboring district that's similar, a neighboring fire department with leadership that you respect highly, reach out to them and see if they might take you under their wing as a mentor, and try to establish that network. That, again, to me, that's where I get recharged. Vacations and whatnot are one great way to kind of come back ready to go, but when I truly am kind of down and out in the fire service and, have some bruises from battles for funding and whatnot, I talk to some of my mentors, my network, because a lot of times they're going through the same exact thing. And while we might not find the answers during those conversations, it just totally changes the way you feel when you walk away from that, just knowing that you're not alone. And the other part of that I'll throw out real quick, Justin, and anyone listening, is for many of these conferences we've talked about, it's often difficult for smaller departments to be able to afford to send folks out to them. But we do have scholarships available from the VCOS for Symposium in the Sun, for Fire Rescue International. These are the premier events internationally where the folks that are facing these difficulties go to be able to talk about this stuff. So fill that out. We'd love to see you at one of them.
Don't have much else to say to that. Just from listening to the description, you're doing a lot, and you're doing a lot because you have a lot of interest in the organization. You have desire to see it be successful. I would caution you too to take care of yourself. You can burn yourself out very quickly trying to do all that. Pull a few more people in to, I think I heard that maybe you're the first employee or something like that. So if it's something like that, you're working there and you're trying to do all this, trying to do training. I was making some notes, training, recruitment and retention, doing a lot of stuff. And to Jordan, what Jordan said, as long as you're making that progress of moving forward, but take care of yourself and be willing to ask some other people for help. Because very quickly it sounds like your dedication to your organization, you can quickly get wore out from that, and that'll frustrate you, and it, from what I hear, won't be good for the organization either. So take advantage of some of those classes, courses, things that are available, but also get some other people to go do some of that and make it a team effort.
So there's a comment in here, and then we're going to move on. The February edition of Firehouse Magazine did an article on volunteers. It's a good read. Now, here's a perfect example of networking. We're on a webinar. Justin asked a question. He got some advice from the both of you. A tidbit to read a Firehouse. And Justin, don't burn yourself out, young man. Okay. Take a step back now and again. It's obvious you're dedicated to what you're doing and you really care, but you got to take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. All right. Take a little time for yourself, catch your breath, do something for yourself, and try to get some help within the department itself. but ultimately, I think as both chiefs said, take care of yourself. So let's move on here. Chief Yancey, looking back over your career thus far, what, if anything, would you do differently?
I've mentioned before that as a result of doing the research on the guide that we've talked about a few times, I mean, there's a lot of those things looking back that if I could do that over again, I would have utilized that tool. I wish like for me, what is so important is that I wish I would have had a desk reference like that to be able to help me back in the day. And I certainly did things that I wish I would have done differently. I think just thinking about through the years, and I started in a volunteer department. I left there and went to another department as their first full-time fire chief. And a lot of times in those situations, I mean, anyone who's going in to be a first full-time fire chief, or soon thereafter being the second or third fire chief, and maybe short tenures of chiefs, has a challenge ahead of them, because most likely your organization is in a transition phase that we've talked about of a growing community needing to move into possibly combination. How do you do that? How do you fund that? And that was some of the challenges we faced is in our organization of how do we do that? But you have to set forth the plan and have the discussion with people about how are we going to move forward. It's lonely at the top. I will say that, especially if you're coming in as someone from an external candidate. And I just think getting involved and surrounding yourself with good people and honest people who will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. That's a critical importance of transitioning in those first 100 days. We talk about that with the president and with governors and any of those positions, but establishing that and getting, basically, as we talk about establishing command, it's no different than being on an incident. Establish command within your organization, surround yourself with good command staff, and those are the things that I have learned.
Chief Cramer? I think you're muted. You're muted, Chief.
Yeah, you got that right. I mean, there's several things I probably would have done differently. One of the big things that has come to mind a few times is prioritizing the implementation of new SOGs a little bit earlier in my tenure. We had a lot of things that need fixed, a lot of relationships that needed to be fixed that we put heavy focus on. And one of the things that's kind of fell to the back burner, and to be honest, we're still finalizing, is our standard operating guidelines. And the reason I mention that is there are several occasions over 3 years I've stepped back and not been thrilled with how maybe a particular call went or how an OIC handled something. And, you start with some disappointment or you're upset maybe at that company officer. And, after I mull it over long enough and think about it, I go back to the fact that, ultimately it's my fault, because had I established SOGs sooner, had I communicated exactly how I wanted that to be handled, they likely would have done that. And it kind of goes back to me. There's a quote from a book that I just mentioned in the chat, Lead Yourself First, where essentially when you're trying to figure out a problem, you start at your own desk and you go in concentric circles outward from there to find how to fix it. And more often than not, you find that issue at your own desk. And I think that goes back to this. The communication of those expectations through SOGs sooner, I think, might have helped us out a little bit.
Okay. So Chief Cramer, Chief Yancey, you're both chiefs of combination departments. And I mentioned earlier, this seems to be a growing trend across the country. Chief Cramer, what advice can you offer a fire department that may be considering the move from an all-volunteer force to a combination force?
Well, these discussions are difficult, so I'd start by applauding them, because the fact that they're willing to explore those options means that they're willing to put public safety above pride and ego. And it's great that they're doing that. My suggestion goes back to the whole kind of thinking outside of the box. In Pennsylvania, for example, even though this is happening all over the country, departments, for the ability for them to sustain and be an organization 10 or 20 years from now, they have to look at new ways of operating. And I think our ability to do that and to look at different ideas like fire districts, mergers, and combination systems is going to be the answer. But my advice is to try to open that line of communication, not to forget the legacy members, because they're likely going to help you through that process, although they're probably going to be some of the most difficult people to deal with. But as we talked earlier, if you spend some time with them and try to get them on your side, they can help hopefully push you over the finish line to make these conversations successful.
Chief Yancey, same question to you.
Yeah, carefully assessing what the real problem is. I mean, again, Jordan's comments about critical thinking and thinking out of the box, like you've got to identify what those issues are. There are times that people think, well, we just need to go to combination, we need people on shift. But in my experience, a lot of times it's identifying exactly where our shortcomings are in terms of servicing the community. That's why we're here. We're here to provide fire protection and EMS to the community. So where is our gap? Where are we having to fill that? And then you have to match that with affordability. How is our community growing? How can we afford to put dollars to that? How do we arrange that in terms of going combination? Is that combination going to hiring part-time people initially and hiring part-time people who are only working from 7A to 7P when everybody goes off to their jobs and can't leave their jobs? So it takes some very careful assessment and looking at the root issues to move forward. And don't be afraid to go find those people who have already gone through it. Go find those people who have stumbled along the way, the people who, again, will be honest to tell you, we tried to do it this way and it didn't work. And you may know some of those organizations that are in your area who have transitioned to combination. Go sit down and talk to them and admit we have a problem in our organization, whatever that may be, administrative or response or those kind of things, and work through those with people who have gone through that, because they'll help you a lot with lessons learned.
So one of the things, and Chiefs, maybe you can weigh in on this. A lot of times, I think the discussions in an all volunteer department about a combination department start in the fire department rather than the local government realizing there's an issue. So one of the first hurdles you're going to deal with is, okay, the idea started in the firehouse, is now you got to convince the local politicians that, look, this is a way forward to solve a problem that we have. And I would think in a lot of communities that probably has to be one of the most difficult pieces of it, is trying to convince the local governments that, hey, you know, we have to do this. If you want to continue to provide service to the community, we have to move in this direction. Am I right in that assessment? I see Jordan smiling and shaking his head yes, and so's Chief Yancey.
Yeah, I think that. Go ahead, Chief.
I was just going to say, you know, you're going to be challenged for the whys. You know, why is it that we need to do this? And to your point, Ed, is that you can't go in there and say, we need to do this. We have to do this, and this is why we have to do it. You need to walk in there with the data. You need to walk in there with the information to be able to start that conversation. Here is where we're struggling as an organization. Our mission is to protect property and save lives. our mission is to be a safely operating organization to respond to the community in whatever the community expectations are of you, whether it's fire or EMS together. But you have to start the conversation, and you have to start the conversation with real information, because just going in there and saying we're going to, you know, have fires everywhere and fires are going to burn out of control is politicians, legislatures, your city councils, they're going to want to hear more than that, especially to what's been talked about here, is that the legislative part and all the things going into legislative matters of property taxes and sales taxes and all those things that they're dealing with, you're going to have to walk in there ready to defend your position.
Yeah, the old adage that, you know, people are going to die, babies are going to die. That doesn't work anymore.
No.
That doesn't work anymore. Chief Cramer, same question to you. Are any advice there?
I think it starts with being transparent, which is very difficult because we want our communities to look to us and respect us. But that change comes through transparency. So I've witnessed many departments that have not identified their needs to their community, and either their community learns what level of service is actually being provided, and it turns into a real problem for the departments. Or, like you mentioned, when you do go to your local government and say we need funding to add some staffing, it goes poorly because they had no idea anything was wrong, and now you are, you know, slapping them with some significant cost to change.
Okay.
And
So
I
for
think,
the, go ahead,
too,
Chief.
you know, having a way to educate, you have to educate and you have to market. Marketing is not a thing that we talk about in the fire service very often, but it's talked about more and more these days. But you have to market your organization, and you have to let the community know where you are at. You have to let them know you need more volunteers. I know we're all doing that, but you have to let them know, and you have to let them know what level of service we're capable of providing. And to go to this level, we need this level of funding. There are some success models out there of community marketing to pass referendums and get increased tax levies and things like that that do work. But to Jordan's point, you have to tell the story.
So just to our listeners, there's a lot of comments in the comment section. I'll review them before we finish tonight to see if there's anybody who needs to comment on them. So for the listeners putting stuff in the chat box, don't think I'm ignoring you. We'll get to you. So a lot of our listeners tonight, chiefs, are most likely members of all volunteer departments. So Chief Yancey, do you have any leadership advice for the new fire chief in an all volunteer department who was recently elected or appointed as the chief?
It's much of the same. I don't come from an environment where the chief is elected, so I can't really speak to that completely, but being a fire chief is important, and it's an important role no matter what organization that you're in or what the makeup is of that organization. It certainly can be challenging as a volunteer. And I was a full-time chief of a volunteer department years and years ago. And your focus needs to be on your mission of primarily servicing the community. How do we get apparatus on the road? And I think just focusing on taking care of yourself, because that's a challenging job. We already talked about that, I think, with Justin. But taking care of yourself, taking care of your mental health, whether you're volunteer chief or paid chief or part-time chief, you have to take care of yourself, because this job can be very nerve-wracking. And as you're trying to meet all those challenges, you have to stay healthy to do that. But just continue to build and make progress. It's really, as a chief, you're a chief, whether it's a full-time chief or a volunteer. We have different types of challenges, but we do pretty much the same kind of things.
Chief Cramer, same question.
Yeah, for new chiefs within volunteer systems, several of the things we've already talked about, but I think you mentioned it, Ed. Try to get out of your local area, get to some of these conferences nationally. For almost every single one, there are grants to be able to get there if you need help to be able to attend. But that is where we have the ability to meet with like-minded people and start to understand maybe ways that we need to change our own organizations. And others just finding that mentor. So sometimes it could be awkward, it could be difficult, but to a new volunteer chief, I'd suggest and challenge them to find both a volunteer fire chief mentor, maybe somebody locally that you look up to or know, and then a career chief as well. I think there's a lot that you can learn from both sides of that equation. And it's difficult to make that ask sometimes. I had a lot of trouble with that when I was younger, to say, hey, will you devote a bunch of time to me or mentor me? Because it feels a little bit awkward, and that's a lot to ask of somebody. But when people do take that on and spend time with you, it's incredible, and it's really what puts us where we're at today. So I think those are two things that are instrumental in developing that chief officer, Ed.
Okay, great. So before we move into the comments that are here or any Q&A, I got one last question to ask both the chiefs, and I always try to finish most of these webinars with the same question. Chief Cramer, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
I think to go to what Justin was talking about, keep trucking along. I think our roads are going to be a little bit tougher over the next couple months and maybe the next year or two. We've got a lot happening all over the place, from funding to other items, the cost of apparatus, and volunteer numbers continuing to decline. So we're going to have some difficult battles, but we all need to stick with it to be able to see this through onto the other side. So just keep coming back at it.
Chief Yancey?
I would just say, keep what's good for your organization and your community as your primary focus. We talked about politics. We talked about those kind of things. Favoritism and politics can cloud your judgment. You have to be looking at it from the bigger goal. Is that your role as a fire chief, or coming in to be a fire chief, is to protect the community, to provide service to the community. So keep your focus there and do it safely, and be able to build all of those things behind you that are necessary, the SOPs, the policies and procedures, but borrow those from your neighbors as well. There's a lot, if you're working in an area, borrow SOPs, look at those SOPs. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're basically looking for similar SOPs, and then your neighboring department that has them, or as Jordan mentioned, you have a career chief somewhere that has SOPs that has already been completed. Get a copy of them and see what works for you and doesn't work. They have to be for your organization. You can't always just change the name at the top. But my words of wisdom is to keep your community safety and service as the focus, and keeping your people safe in doing it.
So I got two questions here in the Q&A. Harry's got a question. Knowing you're both from a combination department, how do you deal with the animosity that may occur between your paid staff and volunteers? Chief Cramer, I'll go to you first.
That was something that was very alive and well when I started with my organization. I think communicating the standard and the expectation is extremely important. We spend a lot of time talking about perspectives and why people are here. When I started in the fire service, I was 14. I was in a combination system as a volunteer. And I constantly heard from different sides of the equation, well, we don't want volunteers to take our job, or volunteer staff saying that, they're not there to take career staffing job. Understanding that people are here to help, I'm in a department that's busy enough to where volunteers could not handle our call volume solely. So we rely on our career staff to be able to do so. And at the same time, we would not be able to respond to our call volume or the severity of calls that we have without our volunteers. Trying to keep that pendulum somewhere in the middle is extremely important, and then holding people to that standard. All of my officer interviews, all of our new career firefighter interviews involve questions about that exactly. How do you explain the value of a volunteer to a career firefighter? How do you explain, conversely, it's something that we talk about and that we focus on. If somebody is not meeting that standard, then we deal with it. So that's how we handle it.
Chief Yancey?
Yeah, I would say it's a balance. It's definitely a balance. You have to, we'll take the career staff and the volunteer staff. They need to be trained to the same levels. That can be challenging, but in our organization, you have to get your firefighter certification. And to be able to work into being a part-timer or riding out on the apparatus, your career people have gone to that level and received their certifications. The volunteers will work to that certification. It may take them longer to do that, but working in that direction. And everyone understanding their roles and their responsibilities, as Jordan talked about. But also I would look at it, if you are a combination department now, and that is where you have arrived, there's probably a chance that you are continuing to be a growing community and you're going to continue to add staffing, which is a situation for us. So how do you give that career path to someone? And I would just throw out some advice that's been successful for us. We're in the high school recruiting cadets, and we're recruiting cadets into a cadet program. And we're explaining to them at that level that you are a cadet, you turn 18, you can become a recruit. We will send you to the academy. You can go to the academy, and then you get your certifications and get all of that completed. We can put you on in a part-time role when we have part-time positions available. And then you're in a position in our state, you have to test for career positions. So you're in a position now to be able to test, you're certified. And so it is a career path, it is a fire service journey that is aiding in bringing more people in. And if you're engaging them at the cadet level, I've heard fire chiefs talk about visiting elementary schools to talk to them about fire service, that you're getting them that young to spark that interest in them, and then in high school bringing them in. But then, and in our organization, we have a bargaining unit as well, but we still have recruits, recruit volunteers who are working their way into going through academy to be able to respond. And we ebb and flow. Sometimes that has not been very strong, and we look to say there may be a time when we can add an extra engine company and stand that up to where these volunteers can come in and get that piece of equipment out the door that otherwise might be coming from 20 miles away. And so that's of a benefit to everybody in our organization, and the career people. When we're out there fighting fire, out there servicing the community in emergency, we want to see those fire trucks and ambulances showing up with good qualified people. So you have to balance that and work that into your organization.
So I'm hearing between the both of you, sharing that vision for your organization and making sure both the volunteers and the careers have the same vision. Chief, and I think it's gotten better across the country. I know several years ago, there were some departments that started combination departments, and there were lines painted down the middle of the apparatus bay, and the career guys on this side, the volunteers on this side. I mean, it's certainly gotten better, but at the end of the day, and I also know of a couple of departments that moved from all volunteer to combination. They started out small with the combination, and none of the volunteers were given an opportunity for those full-time positions, which really soured a lot of people, and not only those volunteers, but a lot of people in the community. Wait a minute, you've been with the department 20 years as a volunteer, you're certified at firefighter 2, and you weren't even given an opportunity to be hired into the new department. That certainly doesn't help matters. So Here's the age old dilemma. Any advice for breaking? That's the way we've always done it mentality. Chief Yancey, I'll start with you.
Why start with me? Start with George.
I guess if we all had an answer to that one, we wouldn't be sitting here right now on a webinar with one another, would we?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chief. Any suggestions?
Well, I mean, that we have to think differently. We've talked a lot about this, and I think the people who are on this webinar, however many people are here because they want to know that and like how to lead through thinking differently. And you know, a lot of talk in the fire service right now is centered around the idea of data, and I don't want to get off into data, but you know, having those conversations about, well, we've always done it this way, so we're just going to continue. Well, we have to show that that doesn't work anymore. And we've had those conversations many times at symposium and other conferences about recruitment and retention. We're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, obviously we know what that is. And so we have to think differently, but I have been, Jordan has been, you know, a young firefighter who went off to the academy and learned about a new technique and came back to have people tell you that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why would we be doing that? We're a small department, we're this, we're that, we're all these reasons why you can't do it until you could really gather enough people to show and demonstrate that this really does work for people to have an aha moment. So I think a lot of what we talked about is you got to keep making progress. And sometimes that is slow, but continuing to spread that message that we need to do this differently. It can be frustrating. It can be at a point where you want to give up sometimes, but we just have to keep making progress forward.
Chief Cramer?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what they're using that phrase for, but if we're talking about the ways that departments operate and how we're answering the public's needs, and the need for our department to advance, I have this conversation a lot when we're teaching recruitment and retention classes across the country. It's, you know, these will often be your legacy members, and they don't want to see that change. But when we boil it down to why we're here and why they're there, these people likely have devoted much of their life, their blood, sweat, and tears to that department and organization, and to see it being built to where it's at that point. And when you get on the common ground of the fact that you understand that what you're proposing is going to be different than what they've done, but the reason that we have to do this is so that the foundation that you've built and you've spent much of your life building, I want to see it here 25 years from now. And for that to be able to happen, we've got to pivot and we've got to try these other ways of doing this. Otherwise, this department, volunteer firefighters, et cetera, they may cease to exist. And, you know, you often get some begrudgingly positive answers after that. They're still always going to bring up some of the past, and they might not like every new thing that you're doing. But I think generally when they understand that you're there for the organization and that's why things have to change and you can't do it the way you've always done it, you get a little bit more progress.
Yep. I two comments I'll make. Sometimes I think you have to make it personal. You got to make the individual understand how it benefits them individually. And, you know, sometimes if you can bring somebody in 25 miles away from your fire department to say the same thing you've been saying, they'll go, "Oh my God, did you hear what he said?" You know, you can't, because sometimes you can't be an expert in your own backyard, but you bring an individual in from 25, 30, 100 miles away, and they can say the same thing you've been saying. You know, we went through some similar things with legacy members when we did our merger in 2019, 2020. And some of the guys that dug in really hard initially are actually the biggest supporters of it now. And you're going to lose some people. There's just, but you know, I kind of look at it this way. If you lose a few people, because they didn't want to adapt to the change, did you really lose anything? Okay. You probably lost a lot of headaches if they went by the wayside.
They were the cancer that needed to go anyway.
Right. You know, and kind of to Ben's point, you know, I did a cancer risk reduction class a couple of years ago in a fairly large career department. And I had an old captain say to me, you know, look, listen, kid, I've been doing this 20 years and I don't have cancer yet. And it's too late for me. And I said, well, you know what, Cap, you might be right. But let me point something out to you. You know, there were a lot of people that worked on the rubble pile in New York after 9/11 that got cancer. But there's an equal number of people that worked in a rubble pile that didn't get cancer. Okay. And do you know an individual who smoked cigarettes forever and has never developed lung cancer, but the individual that's never smoked that's got lung cancer? You know, so why not take the steps now to reduce your risk? You might be that individual that never gets cancer, and you can beat, you can rob the pension fund because you live a long, long life. And he became actually a pretty big supporter of what I had to say the rest of the night, because I took the time to make it personal without being mean about it. So,
Well, I would also say too, like, you know, doing it the same way and people being offended is that Jordan's comment, and we've talked about giving that vision of where it's going, and a transition from a volunteer to combination department is not an overnight situation. It's going to take a while to work into that. And so people understanding our community is growing, our call volume is growing. There's a chart actually in the VCOS Red Ribbon report talking about how calls increase and volunteer ability to do that. So those people will have to be educated to understand the volunteers can't do this all the time when we're getting that many calls. And I would throw out another suggestion, because this is ringing in my ears, that I had a volunteer come to me when we started combination, started going to some career people and hiring some people. And a volunteer came to me and our tones went off. You know, we had one set of tones and they went off for everything. And fire alarms, elevator release, whatever those calls were. And one of the longtime volunteers said, I'm willing to show up whenever you need me, but I don't need to wake up 3 or 4 times a night for an automatic fire alarm. That's a good point. So we changed our tones and made it so that there was a duty tone for those calls that needed to be, and then there was an all-call tone. And, you know, we've evolved even more so now with how those work. But also considering put a group of people on call that can be a battalion or whatever you want to call them, that they're on call and then they get a day off. So they don't have to worry about, as you're growing in a combination organization, this is growing. You may have a duty crew and then you have a volunteer on-call crew that's coming in. So there's a lot of things that you can think differently about that will keep your people engaged, but not wear them out.
okay, so I see a lot of comments in the Q&A or in the chat. Let me pop back here. Someone's got a question again. How do we have a call company tone that the on-duty staff requests to set off so all the volunteers? I think you just answered that one, Chief. It takes, you know, use the technology that's available today. And he even says it's been great. You know, everybody stump toe call and it's been great. So there you go, Chief. Someone else has already adopted your policy, or they may have done it before you. So there's ways to work around problems. If you want to sit down, and the both of you've mentioned critical thinking several times, there's a way to solve some of these issues if everybody just put their head together. All right, so I want to go back here now to the chat. And I'm not going to read down through all these comments, but if we have a question in here, I'll throw it out to the panel. I got to get back up here to the top. Here we go. All right, that's a comment. One of the comments that was made about getting people involved, taking the lead and doing it department-wide trainings, I think are a good way of starting to get everybody on the same page through action. I think this was to one of the comments about, you know, getting everybody on the same page. It starts with you rather than say it, do it this way. Do it this way because of XYZ. Communication is the key. Asking someone how they're doing, look them in their eyes, putting your hand on their shoulder and listening versus asking someone how how you do, how are you doing and walking away. Both have total different meanings. Be genuine. If you're going to act like you care about somebody, care about them. Jordan put a link in here to building community advocates. Jordan Davis, you know, you have to be willing to take the time. I like the quote. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Here, Vance Duncan, make sure your local municipality is the employer for the firefighters. Even if the municipality says they will give you money for paying for firefighters, there's a catch in this. The fire department is responsible not only for the paycheck, the fire department is also responsible for the health insurance, pension, and other expenses. Don't fall for this situation. Connect with your employees. Listen to your crews. What's their mission or goal? Let them speak. Again, it comes down to, you know, active listening, and it comes down to caring about what your people have to say to you. Nice comment in here about hearing from other people. I want to make sure I don't miss any questions in here. If any of your departments have a best practice training document, please share. And Michael Gow puts his email address in here. Sometimes, fellas, you know, I hate to say this to everybody, to our listeners, but you know, Google's an amazing thing at times. Now, obviously, you have to vet sometimes what you're reading. And some of this AI stuff that's available today is pretty amazing at finding some answers as well. Great comments on the combo departments. Let's see. I want to make sure there's not a question in here to throw out to anybody. You have to do what's right for the department and the community. Let's see. I don't see any questions here. And if I miss any, I apologize for it, listeners. But a lot of people put a lot of comments in the comment section. All right. And we're recording. Thanks, Sam. You're hosting this. Let's see. All right. Okay. I think we've got to the end. Hey, guys, you guys will appreciate this. Bill Genoway, no questions, just a comment. Well done, Chiefs.
Thanks.
So.
Thanks, Bill. I
So
did see in the Q&A about a question about bunking in volunteers or something that popped up there. One thing I will throw out as a suggestion, years ago in the volunteer department that I started at, we had a university nearby us, and we started a program with the university where students could stay at the firehouse in exchange for basic shifts. They lived at the fire station, and I do know there are departments out there around the country that have worked to build basically like small little apartments or studio apartments into their firehouses and provide pretty near or free lodging in some cases in exchange for you have to be here at certain times. And that was one of the things we did and many years ago near Southern Illinois University, is that we started a program where we had 2 fire stations, and when we built our second station, we built it for the purpose of having a kind of a little apartment area there that people could live in, and in exchange for that, they had to be on duty basically for a certain amount of time. So there's some other ideas for you.
Yep, Chief Genoway mentioned here that they've had a live-in program for 25 years. 30 minutes from where I live, the State College, the Alpha Fire Company, home of Penn State University's had their students involved in live-in programs for several years now, and it works really well for them. You know, the only advice I'll give you is make sure that you've got standards that they understand that they have to live by. You know, that there's chores they have to do around the station, or certain things they got to do to maintain their ability to stay there. But
Yeah, we had them sign basically a tenant agreement. This is how you have to take care of the facilities, and it's like a rental agreement, but in exchange you have to do this. So, but
alrighty.
you know, even if you're far away from, you know, maybe a few miles away, offering that to a university nearby, you might get people that come from other parts of the country who are volunteer somewhere else and going to school.
So we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank our listeners for being with us tonight. I especially want to thank our panel members for sharing their experiences with us. I mean, these obviously, folks, these 2 guys are pretty busy. For them to take the time that they took with us this evening, I want to remind our audience there'll be a brief survey we'd like you to complete. Keep an eye open in your email from me that will have your certificate of attendance for tonight's webinar. Again, tonight's episode will be uploaded to providentins.com because it's been recorded. You'll receive an email and that link in your email within the next day. Please make sure you check your spam or junk email before sending me an email telling me you haven't got your certificate. For those of you who use the webinar as a training for a group of people, when you receive the thank you for joining us email from Sam, there'll be an Excel spreadsheet attached. Please use this to send the names and email addresses to us for the certificates. If you use the spreadsheet Sam sends you, it makes life a whole lot easier for me to do the certificates, honestly. And then that way I don't have to retype names and email addresses to everybody. You can view previous webinars at www.providentins.com and use the training resources link in the upper right-hand corner of the page. Please join us on March the 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when I'll host Jeff Pauley, a senior partner with the Fire Group Manager at Pacific Point Consulting, for the Fires Out, What's the Issue? This webinar is for anyone involved in the post-fire scene. This includes, but not limited to, fire department personnel, public and private fire investigators, crime scene technicians, law enforcement, insurance adjusters, remediation staff, etc. In other words, if you're going to be involved with the post-fire scene, you should join us to learn about the hazards you can't see or smell and how you can protect yourself. Until then, stay safe for your family's sakes. And thank you all again for joining us.